next to the word to is switched to all panelists and attendees. So on some people's Zoom, it's defaulted to all panelists, which means we'll be, which means we will, which means everybody won't see it. So if you, excuse me, if you want to introduce yourselves, and again, in the next 30 seconds or so, we see Toronto, Jordan, UK, UAE, Mexico, we are, I believe, Indonesia. We may be a 5-continent call today. I believe we are. Oh. Sydney, Nigeria. Actually, we are a 6-continent call today. That's fantastic. So welcome, and do remember, if you'd like to greet the group, instead you must change the designation from all panelists to all panelists and attendees. So again, welcome everyone, and we will get started in just a moment. Okay, it looks like we're all set in terms of broadcasting on our various channels. So we will get set and begin here. So again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Dave Paritsky. I am one of the program leaders here for our business analytics course, meaning I work as part of the faculty team, but also as a student resource throughout the course. So for those of us, hopefully all of you, but for those of you who will be joining us in the course, we will become very familiar with one another. Another familiar face you will recognize as the course begins. I'm very honored to be joined by one of our 2 course professors, Dr. Nektarios Oraiopoulos. So Dr. Oraiopoulos, whom we can call Eris for those who are challenged by the surname, but I promise you it does roll off the tongue eventually. But Dr. Oraiopoulos is joined by Dr. David Stillwell. And I can honestly say, having done several virtual business courses in recent years, that Dr. Stillwell and Dr. Oraiopoulos have a wonderful dynamic together. They each have a distinct pocket of research that they address very directly during the course. They also will have a nice rapport with one another. In fact, that they do come together on one of the faculty webinars. So you'll see a body of work from each of them separately, and then you'll see them come together toward the end of the course. So anyway, we're pleased to have Dr. Oraiopoulos, who will join me in explaining the content of the course in just a moment. So a bit of housekeeping before we get into our agenda today. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, discussion items, this is a marketing webinar. This is for you. So we want to make sure you are getting the information you need to make an informed decision about this program. If anything is either stopping that process or can be enhanced, please use the Q&A dialog box. And I would say we prefer that over the chat window, because the Q&A box, for those who are less familiar with Zoom, enables us to track and archive the questions. So we can, those who will be looking, not only are we speaking, but we'll be harvesting the questions behind the scene. And Aris and I are joined by a fantastic program support team who will also be taking on some of the technical or administrative questions as well. So again, please use the Q&A dialog box at the bottom of your screen. For most people, it's at the bottom, to enter any questions, comments, or feedback. The chat has been nice, and as I said, it's exactly what it's for. It's a chat flow, and at the risk of certain things getting lost in the flow, it's also, it is nice to say hello to one another, and we will use it as a tool sometimes during the course. But generally, anything that requires any response on our part, we encourage you, and in fact, we really urge you to use the Q&A dialog box. We will pause for questions at various times during the presentation, and we will also leave time at the end. So if we did not get to your question right away, please rest assured we will do our very best to get to every question before the end of the session. So I'll just start by running through the agenda real quick, and then we will get started. So we'll talk about the program itself, and you obviously you're seeing our faces here. We'll introduce ourselves in a bit more detail, and then Dr. Oraiopoulos, who not only is joining us today, but we will talk about him and Dr. Stillwell, his co-professor. We do focus here at Cambridge. We like to talk about learning outcomes. Again, the learning outcome is going to be different for every person in the course. At the same time, we do have a set of shared goals or outcomes that we seek for this course. What do we want you to walk away with from this course? What is this course? What isn't this course? This is it's an important conceptual course in the world of business analytics. It is not a coding course, for example, and so we want to make sure we clarify what we do expect the outcomes to be. We'll get into a little bit of the guts of the course. We'll talk about the program, syllabus, case studies, some of the assignments. And of course, this is a certificate program. And that piece is important, not just as a resume builder or LinkedIn credential, which is certainly respected in organizational circles. But the infrastructure of the course is such that one of the things you're paying for, again, you can compare it to paying university tuition versus going to a library and taking a lot of books and magazines out for free. One of the things you're paying for is the infrastructure and the structure of the course. So it's not just seeing the video lectures on demand that you'll see each week, and we'll get into the specific elements of the course, but also the fact that you're in a cohort of students. You'll get to know, this will be a community of students. You'll get to know one another a little bit. You'll get to know the faculty a little bit. We have a constant dialogue. We have weekly sessions. We have office hour sessions. We have live faculty webinars. But we have assignments that are due each week. Nothing that will break your back and nothing that will take more than a few hours a week. At the same time, your ability to keep up with that structure will make for a very high completion rate. And so when we compare the completion rates for a course like this that has an element of structure in it, the completion rates tend to be in the low 90%, 93, 94%. Whereas when you're dealing with an open course, as I said, go online, you can get some lectures, you can certainly string together your own program. For many people, that's an attractive option. It's often a cost-effective option. On the other hand, the completion rates tend to be quite low. They tend to be in the single digits just because life happens, life comes up. So the certificate is not only a recognized credential that from University of Cambridge, but it is also a reflection of the fact that you that you worked with a reasonably rigorous course structure. Doesn't mean it's not flexible. Doesn't mean we don't grant extensions left and right when life gets in the way of completing an assignment, et cetera. But we do have a basic set of rails for this course train to run upon. We'll go over the fee and payment schedule. We also have a couple of slides that focus on you, the participants. This is an executive level course. So what industries you come from, what geographies you come from, your levels of work experience, which we'll address. These are all important elements of what makes for a productive executive course, because quite frankly, one of the advantages of a course like this is that you will be plugged into a community of like-minded, curious individuals, many of whom are at very similar points in your career. Most of you, about 2/3 of you, have more than 15 years of work experience based on some of the surveys we've done. And so really it's a group of people that tend to be in managerial roles, who have come of age, many of whom have business degrees and are either upskilling or filling in gaps or just curious about how data analytics is being integrated into the decision-making or executive suite. Thus the term business analytics, which is really a merger of leadership and business decision-making and data science and data analytics. And what you get is really this need to understand how the data scientists are going about doing their jobs, what the role is for data science and data analytics in general, and how that can impact company organizational decision-making, both today and how it's happened historically and what we expect for the future. And of course, we will be leaving room for questions, and we'll be taking pauses throughout. Again, our goal, these are some of the goals that we have for the course, and sort of to position the course in the way that we've talked about. This is about tools. This is about understanding the role of objective analysis as it merges with human intuition. So, we talk about a culture of data-driven decision-making, but we don't mean managing your company by robots. We mean, where is the role for objective analysis, and how that we actually have a module dedicated completely, and this is one of Dr. Oraiopoulos' specialty modules toward the end of the course, dedicated completely toward the organizational barriers and the processes of adopting data analytics within an organization. We talk about different frameworks. Again, we talk about the role of big data, not just the history of big data, but the role and how organizations can use it as what we call a strategic asset. In other words, how they can use it to well, simply put, to grow revenues or cut expenses, but really how can use it as a strategic planning tool for the organization. And also understanding the right analytics tools. We will be going over several different methodologies. We'll be talking about the evolution of descriptive into predictive and prescriptive analytical tools or algorithms. We will be talking about we'll be talking about the origins of neural networks, for example, how artificial intelligence and machine learning are essentially constructed using the human brain as a model, and how that plays out in decision-making tools. There's an entire module on experimentation, on how companies from Amazon down conduct regular experiments using the consumer base, to make informed decisions about what they might do next. So again, we really will look at a variety of tools. I will say to those people who are raising their hands, we don't have that tool available. It's not feasible in a group this large. What we do is we ask you to use the Q&A dialog box. So please use the question and answer dialog box, and then we will get to them. It becomes very unwieldy very quickly when we have 100 people talking in a conversation. So again, that's just the formatting issue there. So again, I'm just taking a peek at the questions. These are all very good questions. I think what we will do is we will keep going for now, just because of many of the questions will be answered in the course of the presentation. But don't worry, we will be looking at all the questions. So please keep them coming. So a little bit about me. That's what I look like when I wear a tie. Again, I've spent about 20 years in the research analytics space. With an adjunct professorship in conjunction with that. Over the last couple of years, my faculty role has expanded, so I've spent more time with the online courses, and including this Cambridge. I believe this is my 6th or 7th run of this particular course. So we'll make sure we update that. Bio, but that's me. And as I said, I'm your course leader, which means that I will be running the office hours each week. I will be working with you on the live webinars and moderating them, and acting as a bridge between the faculty team, whom you also interact with, and the other elements of the course. Dr. Oraiopoulos, you see his bio here. Again, as I said, he is a full-time lecturer, professor at Cambridge University. He's also director of the master's program in strategy, marketing, and operations. And specifically, he has also done quite a bit of consulting experience in the organizational and corporate world, as you can see here, not just the private sector, but also the government and municipal sector as well. So this is a good segue for Dr. Oraiopoulos to step in and not only introduce his colleague, Dr. Stillwell, who you will see, and Aris and David really do act as a dynamic duo throughout the course. And Aris is going to spend a little bit more time on the course as we continue our back and forth. Aris?
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction, Dave. Hello from me as well. Welcome. We are so pleased to see so many of you joining us today. And as Dave was saying, this is a course about people who want to understand data, want to understand how they create value with using data. So my background in a nutshell is that I come from the programming, very technical background. And as I made the transition to the management world, the one thing I realized is that often senior management gets intimidated or overwhelmed by anything that has to do with analytics. This has probably changed over the past 2 years, but we still get so many people who are in a senior management position. They manage people, they manage even data scientists, but they are feeling a bit overwhelmed when we talk about data. And what I found really, if you want, inspiring in a way, was that how can we make a connection between the strategic decisions and decisions that are more data-driven or facilitated by data? And that's how, together with David Stilwell, we put together this course in a way as a bridge between the people who are the coders who are doing the data science and the people in the organization that make decisions, to allow both of them coordinate better and essentially create value for the organization through data. And that value, as Dave was saying, it's not that you will automate the decisions. It's essentially getting better insights, learning about your business, and so on. Very briefly, as Dave was saying, this course is taught together with my colleague David Stilwell. I would highly suggest that you go and visit David's website. He has done a number of really interesting research projects, as well as consulting projects with several different industries, businesses. Essentially, he is an expert in big data and machine learning, and he's doing what he calls the people analytics. How do you understand better your customers? How do you understand better your employees? Everything that has to do with the psychological aspect. As you can see, he's also the academic director of the psychometric centers at Cambridge University. So to move to the next slide. So what kind of people do we usually get? As we were saying earlier, we tend to get a lot of senior people in the organization. So a lot of time we get participants who ask us, well, I know there is this vast amount of data in my organization, but I don't know how can I use it to improve my business. And of course, one important takeaway from this course, and we cannot emphasize that enough, is that you shouldn't be looking at just the data what you have. The next level up is to think, what data do I need to collect to create value for my organization? And for that, we offer a number of examples from leading companies, and not just the usual suspects such as Google or Apple and so on. You will see that we cover a very broad range of industries and a very broad range of decisions. So it's not just about what kind of product to show you on my website, things that, for example, Amazon or other e-retailers are using. And what we really want you to get thinking is about creating innovative products, innovative services through experimentation. And what we mean by experimentation here is always trying to think of this, what is it that the next hypothesis would you like to test? What kind of data do you need? And so on. So those are how leaders create value in the organization. But what we're trying to do in this module is to try to get this kind of mentalities to employ data and think what kind of data you need to use. And I think I saw a couple of questions earlier that about someone in a senior management position asking, is this course suitable? That's exactly actually one of the key target audiences for senior management, and that's why it's an executive education course. It's not a course about coding in the sense that you won't be asked to write code. So you're not going to see things like what kind of libraries I need in Python or R or other computer languages to run the specific implementations. And there was another question, I think, by someone asking that I'm in a more junior position. Is that course suitable for me? As long as you have an interest in analytics and you see yourself being involved in the analytics project that your organization has or will have in the future, and from what we see out there, it's hard to imagine any kind of leading organization or organizations who aspire to be leading in the industry to not be involved in some kind of analytics project. It's just the evidence, as we will discuss in the course, it's so, I mean, it's so strong by now that leading companies do rely on analytics. I mean, we have established causality to, for at least for that aspect. So moving on, specific learning outcomes that we would like to achieve from this course. So one unique course about this course is that we don't start with the data. So actually you will do the first module with me. We're not going to see the typical start where, this kind of courses start with, for example, descriptive statistics. We're going to start with decision making. How do people make decisions? How do business leaders make business decisions? And the one thing that we know for sure on 20 years or 40 years actually of decision making under uncertainty is that decision-making processes are dominated by biases. So, and often those biases, they live in very different departments in the organization from where the data resides. So what we're trying, the first step is to understand your own decision-making process, identify the biases, and think how you can use data to overcome those biases. So it's an end-to-end decision-making process, right? It's not just an isolated, okay, I run a Python code, I get a probability, but so what for the rest of my decision process? So that's the first point. The second point is that to get you to be asking questions. We don't have all the answers for you because you know your organization better than us, obviously. So you'll see a lot of the assignments that you will be doing will get you thinking about asking questions about your organization. For example, when you talk with David about big data, the assignment would be, okay, but what does big data mean for your organization? Would you like to do some kind of sentiment analysis on your company's Twitter? Would it be more useful to look at the LinkedIn profiles of some of the applicants and so on? And then, of course, one important aspect that you will get from this program is to realize or get exposed to the universe of the different data sources out there. David will talk about the application programming interfaces. How do you access data? How do you download data? You will do a few short examples, but that would not require you to write any kind of advanced code. And last, of course, it's the more standard, the data science component, which is, we will show you how to summarize data, how to use different tools to predict. So this is the more standardized, descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive analytics. And the approach we follow there is we show you the tools, but we don't get into the details of, and actually we do implement some of the tools. For example, for machine learning and neural networks, David will illustrate TensorFlow from Google. You can go online, you can access the website, you can play around with that neural network. But of course, we won't be asking you to write the code for designing a neural network. And honestly, I mean, this is quite a complex thing. To do it right, you do need to be a data scientist. It's not something that you can do over a weekend, for example. But what we want you to know is that those tools are available and you can identify the right people or even hire the right people in your organization, the coders, to write the code for you.
And I would just support Dr. Oraiopoulos here and say that we often get this question, and we tend to see it for those familiar with the analogy as a Goldilocks approach in terms of the level of programming or coding. This course will give you exposure, and for many of you, this will be familiar. For many of you, it will be completely a foreign language. to, for example, the front end of APIs, the application program interfaces, the way websites talk to one another, and the way they effectively do it every day on your phone, not to mention in the world of business, or, for example, looking at something like a neural network development, like TensorFlow. And our professors will give you just enough exposure that 75% of the people have experienced about 5 minutes of bewilderment, and then realize that this is actually less of a barrier and it's more of a terminology barrier and less of a structural barrier to understanding the rest. So we want you to walk away with an appreciation, let's put it that way, an appreciation and even a mild fluency in terms of what the data scientists do for a living, without having to engage in the years of computer coding or computer science behind it. Same thing with statistical methodologies, decision-making, decision trees, even some microeconomic principles. So it's all there, and our goal is to provide enough exposure that it all fits into a conceptual picture, but not that we're causing the kind of pain that you would be spending an entire semester on these topics.
Thanks, Dave. And Yasmin is asking what kind of tools. So we cover a very broad range of tools. We mentioned neural networks, we cover regression analysis, classification trees, cluster analysis, essentially, the tools about data mining that allows you to identify patterns or predict something about, from your data set. And we also cover tools that have to do more about balancing risk and rewards. For example, when you run a simulation and you calculate probabilities such as what's the likelihood that my portfolio or my marketing product mix will have a return or above 5%, what's the probability of hitting certain targets. And again, what is important to see here is that we will run those simulations for you. We will get you the graphs with the outputs. And what we want you to be able to do is to read those graphs. We want you to be able to think how you would present such a graph in front of in the board of your company, but not to actually produce, of course, this graph yourself, because that's as they were saying, that for that you need some kind of data science expertise, which is not what we're trying to do here. We want you to be familiar with the tools and so on. So Dave, over to you.
Sure, and I'll walk through a bit of the structural elements of the course, and then Aris will go through some of the case studies and assignments in a little bit more depth, so you'll actually see some real illustrations. But again, to Jasmine's question, one other adjacent question we're often asked is about specific software packages. You do not need any. There's no prerequisites for understanding any specific software, and we do not work with any software packages like Tableau or Python or R. Well, those are all we mention a lot, but we do not work with any during the course. We cover them in the context of the outputs they produce. So again, we will make them less scary, but we actually don't. And any of the software that we are exposed to in the course is either pure spreadsheet analysis that you can look at on Google Sheets or Excel, or they're web-based, what we call sort of walks around the park. They're web-based dips into online interfaces that are very easy to use and sample and derive some conclusions from. So what is the structure of the course? And this is something that we are often asked in this webinar. It is a bit of a hybrid. Each week a module is released. So there's a dedicated course platform, basically a portal, a hub, where you have your profile. You'll see the other students' profiles. It's a sort of a networking hub in addition to sort of a home base. And at that point, there's a section where, there's a link to all the webinars and office hours and everything else that goes with the course. So in addition to the sort of basic portal functions, we have a series of materials that gets released. So each week you'll see about anywhere between 10 and 20 videos. They're short videos. The total length of the videos is generally between 1 and 2 hours. but they are digestible in small bites. And this is just reflective of the fact that it's an executive program. People are busy. Sometimes you get a free half hour during a lunch break. Sometimes you have to spend a Saturday afternoon. It really depends. These are on-demand videos. They are produced. Dr. Oraiopoulos is in half of them. Dr. Stillwell is in the other half. And they are videos that are, as I said, they are not interactive in the sense that you can consume them on your time and your demand. They often have knowledge checks or quizzes embedded in the videos. Those quizzes are not marked. They're just there as optional exercises to test your absorption of the material. So each week, usually it's on a Thursday, we have the release of the module. And again, the first thing you'll do is you'll watch the videos on your own time. We also have weekly office hour sessions. So myself and other course leaders, once weekly, we will have an office hour session that is live. Everything that we do is live is also recorded. So if you're not able to attend, not to worry, within a few hours, the recording is posted in the same, the corresponding section of the course platform. But the office hours it's the opposite of the video. It is not on demand in the sense that it's live or you're watching a recording of a live session, but it is the least formal element of that. In other words, you can come in for 5 minutes, ask a question, get an answer, leave. You can stay for an hour and engage in a discussion. Sometimes we have fascinating discussions in our office hours, especially as we get on into the course and people talk about these concepts as they are viewed through the lens of their own experience. So we have the office hours. We also have live faculty webinars. We have about 4 of them during the course, and that's where Dr. Stillwell, Dr. Oraiopoulos will appear that's a nice happy medium, because there's often a formal component where they're presenting some slides or discussing an assignment. At the same time, more than half of those hour-long webinars is comprised of Q&A. So it's a chance to basically have a webinar like this and interact directly with the professors. My role there, I will moderate, but I'm generally in the background so that you can have a direct dialogue with the professors. We have a moderated discussion board element where each week we will be having not just a Q&A discussion board that you can clarify topics and assignments, but also that we can share experiences with one another in a structured discussion. And we do have a weekly assignment. The assignments are not, as I said, they're not backbreaking. They're not meant to force you to spend 5 hours on a task and then compete for a letter grade. Again, this is an executive course. These assignments are generally interesting exercises. There's a lot of discussion. We often want to hear what you think about a specific experience or reflect upon a specific experience, and then write a couple paragraphs in some cases. So it's again, they're very self-explanatory and menu-driven, but these are all part of that one weekly module. And then the following week, the assignment is due, and then we start all over again. And so you'll have 9 weeks of this, of these modules being released one by one. So that's the basic structure. It's a mix of the on-demand, less interactive component like the video lectures, the middle ground, which is the semi-interactive component like the webinars, which is an interactive session with a formal element, and then the office hours, which is completely interactive but with an informal aspect to them. And then everything in between when we have some of our discussion boards and assignments, etc. So happy to elaborate when we get into the questions. I think at this point, though, let's give, if ours can take 10 or 15 minutes and maybe 10 minutes to go through the syllabus as well as some of the specific examples, because I know people will be interested in that.
Great. So, yeah, as I was saying before, we look at end-to-end decision-making, beginning with how people and organization make decisions. So the entire first module, we ask you to make some decisions, and you will notice certain patterns in the way you'll be making those decisions. So identify those right from the get-go to show you how important it is and how robust those findings is about how people make decisions. And then we move on to analyzing data, to deriving patterns from data. And we talk about the descriptive analytics, which, obviously it goes beyond to just estimating averages and standard deviations. Descriptive analytics these days is so powerful. It can be anything from, sentiment analysis, identifying what your customers feel on Twitter about your company. Essentially, descriptive analytics look at the history and they give you ways to describe all kinds of data about your organization, including, of course, big data. And that part you will cover with David's will get you think about how much broader are the data that perhaps you can access and use outside sort of the traditional comfort zone in your organization. Because I saw a question from a finance professional earlier on the Q&A box. And if you think about it, one of the things that we often discuss with finance or accounting professionals is, you do a standard net present value calculation based on often just a single point estimate. You expect the demand for next year to be, let's say, 10,000 units. But then when you look at the history of your demand, you realize that there's a lot of variation. Sometimes the demand was less, sometimes was above. And often people struggle to incorporate this kind of uncertainty into the net present value formula. But what you will see in this course is that with just extremely simple tools, you can integrate this. You can integrate uncertainty to the standard net present calculation you will see in finance. So that's what we mean by getting you out of your comfort zone in terms of if you are in a specific discipline like finance, how do you use data that traditionally you haven't been using? Big data opportunities, right? Then we move on to experimentation. And again, the most quintessential method for experimentation is the A/B experiments that, especially for those of you who are running companies with websites, you might be considering things such as, well, what happens if I move my sign up button from left to the center of my screen? Would that affect how many people actually sign up for my product or service? This is the standard, like I said, A/B experiment. There's so much more you can do with experimentation. Experimentation is the mindset of asking questions and trying to test those questions, those hypotheses with rigor. Then we moved into predictive analytics. And this is where all the fancy stuff of machine learning, AI gets into play. What if you have hundreds or thousands of data points? Can you predict something from those? And here you will see a wide range of tools, including the neural network stuff that we mentioned earlier. But again, one thing that we often discuss here with participants is, so is machine learning the answer to everything? And the obvious, excuse me, the obvious answer there is no, because machine learning cannot debias your decision-making process. You will have to do that for yourself. Machine learning doesn't know what questions to ask. And again, you have to do that, for yourself and for your organization. So that's why we have two modules at the end, one about the organizational challenges, which I cover, and one about the ethical and legal issues, because as we've all experienced the past few years across the globe, yes, there is a lot of data out there, but oftentimes, it's not legal or it's not ethical to use this kind of data to make projections. So just because you can, it doesn't mean that you should. And also with the organizational issues, one of the most common patterns, if there is, someone asked how many people have taken this course, is in, over 1,000 people so far. So we have a good sample of people and we try to interact with as many as possible as we can. I can safely say, looking at the assignments and the discussions that we had, that it's 99% of organizations out there, they get into a bottleneck about deriving value from analytics, not because of the complexity of the tools, but because of some of the organizational issues. The most common one is that the existence of silos, that the people who have access to data and understand how to use the data, they don't necessarily have decision-making power, and so on. So we left that for the end, but because it is, if you want, the glue that sticks everything together. So we discussed about those issues to give you We have on the slides a few examples about the different case studies that we use. Pretty much every module has at least one, often more than one cases. For example, for the hotel industry, we ran an A/B experiment to test whether online advertising pays off. And how would you know that? And we ask you to think, how would you design an experiment to see that whether your company is, registered to one of these online websites, whether does it pay off, and what you realize is often that it is the conceptual question, how would I test that, rather than the actual implementation that is the challenging part. We talk about Netflix and the tournaments that they learn, one of the milestones moments in machine learning. We also show you how neural networks can produce pieces of art that even art experts cannot distinguish from the original artwork.
And Aris, I just wanted to chime in on Netflix because it's a popular, it's quite popular as a way to as essentially a microcosm or proxy for recommendations and recommendation engines in general. So retailing sites based on your browsing experience or based on your purchasing experience. So a lot of elements of business analytics play into what seems like a very mundane application, which is you watch 3 comedy movies, so Netflix recommends a 4th. And as you know, Netflix now has hundreds of different categories, some of which are almost comical in the way they sound, to represent groups of movies. And that's, but taking away the labels, it's actually a remarkable demonstration of how predictive analytics is used. In other words, taking the past, analyzing the past, extracting predictive value, and then prescribing a solution for the future. And as I said, what Netflix does, and again, it's not purely about Netflix or even purely about video recommendations, but it's just a convenient example that's very consumer friendly, something we're all familiar with. And we do take a look at some of the underlying concepts behind recommendation engines and the beginnings of predictive intelligence or predictive analytics as applied to machine learning in general.
And Lexington, by the way, is a great company that applies not just, they are known, of course, for the machine learning tournaments, but if you look deeper into Netflix, they also are known about their organizational culture, a key enabler of analytics. They do tons of A/B experiment. Even the trailer that you see on Netflix, maybe you see a different trailer than I see because they've run an A/B test on the kind of consumers that I represent, and so that I like trailers, let's say, with more or less action than other customer segments. So they very nicely put together a lot of the comps that we do. We have other case studies. One that I talk about is the Cambridge Breakthrough Science, a biotech company based in Cambridge. And I like this example because at the outset, this looks like a typical case where you calculate net present value. So you have a portfolio of 4 projects, you do the finance calculations, but then you realize that a lot of the strategic components of decision making, they don't fit into the net present value calculation. So then I want you to get to think, yes, we have this data, we run those calculations, but what about the actual decision? We also talk about the Orion project of UPS, one of the analytics projects that has one of massive impact, not just on the financial side with UPS saving over $400 million per year, but also on the environment with reduction of 100,000 miles driven. And I can't remember the exact number about CO2, but again, a massive impact on the environment. And what's really noteworthy about this case is that UPS had an amazing algorithm, but it took them a few years to actually get the drivers of the trucks to implement this. Like I think in the first year, they only had 5 people who actually wanted to use the algorithm to tell them in what order to deliver the packages. Fast forward, by now all 50,000 drivers or so of UPSs globally, now they run this algorithm. They're extremely pleased, made their life much easier.
I'll just interject with a couple of answers so we're keeping pace with the Q&A. Takashi asks about, do I need to prepare analytic tools and apps for this application, or sorry, excuse me, for this education? No, as we mentioned before, we do not require any specific tools or apps beyond just the web interface of the course. We will provide exposure to many tools and web apps in the course over the course of the course, but you do not need to have any prior exposure to them. If you had exposure, I think you'll enjoy it. If you didn't have exposure, you'll come to appreciate it. Paul asks about the hotel industry. We do use that as a classic example of experimentation on the marketing front. It's one of our early modules. We look at the effectiveness of different kinds of web advertising, and really it's more about the experimentation that's used to gauge the effectiveness of the program as opposed to the technology of the advertising itself. But we do look at the hotel industry, and it's a nice way to discuss how travel in general and hotel industry does use analytics as part of its strategic decision making. So again, a lot of, and these are, we know we get these questions all the time. So Cleophas has another question about software, and again, we do not require the use of any analytics software. We will talk about things like R or RStudio, Python. We will mention them and they will come up in context, and we often will give examples of computing code, not for you to have to write or interpret, but just to show you how that accompanies the regular language interaction. So for example, when we talk about application program interfaces, when you've got an app on your phone that's asking you for your location, that's an API. That's an app talking to the location element of your phone. And we will illustrate how that happens. And so you'll see lines of code, but nothing that you have to actually interpret or know. It's just we use it for illustrative purposes only. Okay. I think we've answered all of the. So again, no worries about R or Python or anything like that. You will. This is more of a conceptual course.
Yeah, and just to add here that, I mean, all the cases, all the examples that we're using, they are based on practice. There are things that companies have implemented, they have applied. Nowhere in our slides you will see some kind of theory, like how, some kind of statistical proof or anything like that. Those are very hands-on. This is the tool, this is how company X used it. And when we're not restricted by any confidentiality agreements, we will say, okay, here's actually the benefit that this company has received. Right. And just very quickly, just to add here a point that, Dave mentioned earlier on about this community building. And this is something that very actively we are trying to do with this course, is to actually get to think how you apply those in your companies and come back to us, even, after the end of the course, and let us know how did it go, what learnings you have, and even share these learnings, with your module, your cohort, or the cohort after you, or even the cohorts before you. So that's really important for us to get practical insights also from you to make this a two-way street.
Okay. All right, we have a bunch of questions piling up, but why don't we keep going, and we'll continue to return to the questions. But again, it's a very, if anything, you will be overwhelmed by practicality for this course, because there are probably no fewer than 15 or 20 different companies and cases that are examined, which is what we've done based on people's feedback. That's what people like to hear. So Elenia, for example, I don't think you'll find a lack of case studies. And I don't mean that facetiously or snarkily at all. I just think you'll see that between case studies and anecdotes, so, case study light, there are many. So this is just a glance at some of the assignments. We do kind of have to power through here to make sure we finish on time. Aris, anything you want to highlight specifically, other than, again, these are somewhat self-explanatory, but these are three of our 9 assignments that are specifically case study oriented.
Yep. For example, the middle one, it is based on a real company, but we can't disclose the, the exact name of the company. We can't disclose the exact saving, but we try to give you as much information as possible about. And it's an interesting case because it also combined prescriptive analytics. So they use some kind of machine learning tools with some prescriptive things, such as the decision tree you will cover with me.
And I have to say, if I had to play, I can't play favorites with Dr. Oraiopoulos and Dr. Stillwell because they're good friends, and then it will get back to me. But if I had to pick one favorite from each, the neural networks piece by Dr. Stillwell is based on not only some groundbreaking research he has done in the past, but it really serves as an excellent foundation. My other favorite is understanding the decision tree piece. Because what we don't realize, and this is Dr. Oraiopoulos' module dealing with the smart service case, what we don't realize is how every day we are making weighted average probabilistic decisions as executives. And so understanding the probability of something happening, and then the value of that something, the value of that outcome. There's a 30% chance that that this scenario will unfold. There's a 70% chance that this scenario will unfold. If the 30% scenario unfolds, it means this for the company in terms of revenues or expense mitigation or growth or customer base. If the 70% scenario, it means this. How do we plan with these improbable or these unknown or uncertain outcomes based on the value of each outcome that we don't even know is going to happen? And that's, as I said, if you speak to any global 500 executive, that kind of decision making is something that happens hourly, daily, if not hourly. And so understanding the design elements of that, as I said, I think I'm being reasonably objective. That's one of my favorite elements of the course, and we get to do that about 2/3 of the way.
Just in 20 seconds, Dave, I really noticed the last 6 months with all the COVID, things happening around the world, that how people that never mentioned the word probability before suddenly starting at, yes, but there's an 80% probability that I will be asymptotic or with mild, 15% probability that I might, maybe the host and the 5% of. So just enter the vocabulary, the word probabilities, because of everything's happening right now.
Agreed, 100%. Right. The COVID world, again, I do want to say one thing about where we are on our, planet, or, on our planet, is that we recognize this program is remarkably similar now to the way it was run in 2018 and 2019. Some of the content has been updated, but the online mechanism is no different in the world of COVID than it was in the world before COVID. Now, I will say that some of that is due to an incredible amount of flexibility by our program support team, because many of people who were running this out of offices are running it out of homes. And so there have been some disruptions behind the scenes, but as a delivery, it is remarkably consistent. Now, on the other hand, the world has changed, and we've recognized that the community aspect of this course, as Dr. Oraiopoulos just mentioned, is that much more important. So people are less afraid in general of the online medium and less hesitant to participate, not just in Zoom calls and conferences, but also in discussion groups, in virtual communities. Participants will often form a LinkedIn group in addition to the coursework, so they can continue on long after the course is done. And all of that, I think, is something on a very human level, that we, despite not, COVID is not just a work disruptor. It's a public health issue, and it's an issue that affects many people at home and very personally through themselves or their loved ones. So we just want you to know that we think about that all the time, and our goal is to deliver something in a continuous fashion, so that in our small way we're providing some degree of stability and normalcy, but that we're also responsive to your needs as individuals and caregivers and family members, so that, for example, dealing with flexibility on extensions needed for assignments, or just being there as a supportive community and group that gives you a sense of being away from the everyday challenges. And just we do want you to know that we take that role very seriously. In the meantime, when you're all done, You will have your certificate. This is what a digital copy looks like. And again, it is a certificate from the University of Cambridge Judge Business School, reflecting a course taught by University of Cambridge professors, et cetera. It is what's known in the world now as a stackable micro-credential. So it's a certificate that certainly carries a lot of value. What it applies toward, we get some questions of what, can this be used for X degree or Y degree, or is it an automatic, entrance qualifier for something else? You would have to ask the institution involved. I mean, that's just the reality we live in right now. We're in a weird transition phase where certificate courses are, especially the more established certificate courses, like this one and ones like it, are growing in terms of their recognition in the overall space. But it really depends on the organization in terms of what, how applicable it is beyond a nice bullet point on your resume, which is sort of universally acknowledged. So this is the payment information. Again, you all have worked with program advisors and people that have introduced you to the course, the people who told you about this webinar, for example. So this should not be a surprise to most of you, but if you have any questions, please feel free. I know there are flexible payment options. Aris and I have the privilege of not having to be involved on the payment side, so I will happily plead ignorance to this side of it. On the other hand, I know that our team it tries to be as sensitive as possible to individual needs and schedules and constraints. So again, if you have any questions, I encourage you to reach out to the folks you've been talking to already about this course. You can also pose a question in the Q&A box, and our program support team will follow up with you offline. So again, we want to be we want to be clear, and we understand this is a fact of life. And again, our goal is to make sure that for every one of those $2,000 that is spent on this course, you are receiving the highest degree of value possible. That's what Dr. Oraiopoulos, Dr. Stillwell, myself, and the program support team working with us are responsible for. But we take that role very seriously. That's as I said, the upside of executive clients or executive participants in a course like this is that the discussion level, the experience level, you're just more interesting as students, and not to have any slight toward our undergrad and graduate students whom we teach offline in different capacities. But what we also know is that you keep us on our toes. You guys are clients. You're paying for a course. It's not only the material costs of this course, but it's the opportunity costs that you're not doing something else at that very moment that is immediately productive. And so we want to make sure that you are, we not only want to make sure you're getting your money's worth, but we know that you are not going to let us rest until you do. And that keeps us on our toes. So in many ways, it's a more rigorous course for us to teach, but it's also more rewarding. And this is just a snapshot of where you are. The point of the exercise, whenever you see a graph that has this many bars, is to showcase the fact that throughout the history of the course, which probably encounters about 4,000 students by now, this is the general geographic spread. Of course, the UK has what we call home field or home court advantage, but otherwise, really, it's a reasonably it's a reasonably universal spread among 6 continents. And if you include some of the other countries, I think we've had well over 100 countries represented overall in the history of the course. In terms of your functions, again, business analytics is such a wide-ranging set of topics. It's applicable across job functions, across industries. So, and that's a good news or bad news. If you're looking for a course of people who all have the same job that you do, and sometimes that's a comfort, we're not able to provide that here. On the other hand, if you're looking for a diversity of thought, diversity of job function, and frankly, 17 other measures of diversity, just based on the fact that people are coming from different parts of the world and different parts of their own careers, you will certainly get that here because of the universal application of data analytics. And just to mention about job experience, we have another set of data that will be in the future in a shared version of the slide deck, but it showcases that about 2/3 of you have more than more than 2/3 of you have more than 10 years of work experience. More than half of you have more than 15 years of work experience. So it is a reasonably experienced group, but there are also people with, I think about 20% of you have less than 10 years, less than 5 years of their work experience. So it's a good mix, but it does gear toward the sort of middle to senior management level of work experience. And this, again, is the snapshot of the industries. And so graphs like this are not always helpful other than to illustrate the breadth of where you're coming from. Because even the banking, financial services, others, and consulting, the top 3 elements are applicable to other industries as well. So it's really a good hodgepodge, if you will, of industry backgrounds. So we'll spend the last couple of minutes looking at some of the questions, and Aris, we can sort of tag team here. What's the difference between this course and the offering in business analytics offered by Harvard? I've heard of Harvard before. I think it's a technical school. I think is it a college or a high school? I don't know. I'm sorry. I should be the one making fun of Cambridge, not the Brits making fun of Harvard. The reality is most big brand business schools will offer a business analytics course because it's a popular topic, frankly. It's not only a popular topic, but it's a topic that executives are very hungry for. I can speak and there are many good courses out there. I think first of all, you wouldn't believe me if I said there weren't, and I don't want you to be here because you fell for a sales pitch or a lie. This particular course I can speak to, and I can compare it to some others that I've seen in the field, does a particularly good job of mixing the hard and the soft, if you will. The sort of, we're not afraid to talk about APIs and programming and TensorFlow and neural networks and A/B experimentation and look at some of the underlying methodologies. But this course tends to focus on the practical applications much more. So you're not bogged down in terminology and definitions. It gives you just enough of the framework and underlying methodology to understand the application and appreciate why it worked or why it was helpful or why it was useful. I will also say, and I say this, not to sound funny, but Dr. Oraiopoulos and Dr. Stillwell are well regarded. I think, and I can say this with candor. Not every professor who is well known in the bricks and mortar world of academia has been able to translate his or her expertise into the online or virtual community. It's just a different skill set. These 2 professors do a very good job of that, especially when you have the chance to have a faculty webinar and engage with them. We've never had a webinar where people, where we finish on time because people are always asking additional questions, and where people don't ask us for more or express their appreciation in some way. And that's also has to do with the focus of their research. And you can read more about where their research is focused on the Cambridge University website. But again, it's not that other universities don't have good courses. This happens to be one of the well-regarded ones out there. But we encourage you to compare, and you can keep asking, please talk to your advisors and ask specific questions. And at the end of the day, you're going to have to make a decision. It probably doesn't make sense to take both, unless you have a lot of time on your hands. But, again, sometimes it just comes down to making a decision and going with it. But as I said, Harvard, MIT, Wharton, Columbia, all these schools offer fine courses. And in this general realm, this happens to be really one of the good ones out there, if not better than that. So this is a good question, and I try to pick out questions or prioritize questions that are more universally applicable. And yeah, Iris, feel free to jump in too. But Dolores has a question about working as a finance manager, but retired after suffering a spinal cord injury. I'm really interested in this course. Do you accept people who are not working? First of all, Dolores, we hope you're healing and doing better. Second of all, absolutely. I would say 80-ish%, so 75 or 80% of the people who are in this course are working, and they're currently with organizations and companies where these concepts can either be applied directly, or perhaps the company is sponsoring them to upskill. But a good portion, as I said, 20-ish% of our students are either in the job search. They're looking to change careers. They're looking to just build up their personal knowledge. So there may be areas where you're asked to reflect on an experience through your own lens, and you can just refer to your past job or a hypothetical job. But no, absolutely, there's absolutely no requirement to be working while you're doing this. In fact, for some people, taking some time off to take a course like this is people do that on purpose, even without the difficult reason that you had. So absolutely not, you're not required to be employed while taking this course. That's not our business. Yeah, Gonzalo asks if is there a difference in the Wharton program? Yeah, I can speak to that. Again, I think this is more about the application than the Wharton program. It's more about a guided journey with more stops on the application. The Wharton program tends to get heavier into spreadsheet methodology and the statistical methodology. So I know they will spend more time on Excel-based exercises on things like simulation and optimization. Here, we mention those concepts, like for example, here we'll talk more about neural networks and artificial intelligence. I would look at the descriptions, because what both programs do a reasonably good job of is showcasing their individual areas of competency. I think in some ways this is a more well-rounded alternative, because you're dealing on both sides, again, through familiar cases, and through the two faculty members whom you'll get to know pretty well. The Wharton courses generally are team taught by multiples, so it's just different strokes for different folks, as the expression goes. If you did bad, we have a question. If you did bad assignments and you didn't achieve some result, you will not receive a certification. Is this sentence right? Well, it is and it isn't. This is an executive course, so it's the equivalent of what we would call a pass-fail course in academia. So in other words, if you make a good faith effort on your assignment and you do it 7 out of the 9 weeks, you will get your certification. So the only way you would not receive a certification is if you do not turn in assignments, or if you are, you just don't bother to answer the questions. If you are, and quite frankly, if you're either running late or if you didn't understand an assignment and you need clarification, we will work with you. Our goal is for everyone who completes the good faith effort to pass the course. So if we need to work with you along the way, we can certainly provide help. That's why we have these multiple layers of our faculty team as well. We have Dr. Oraiopoulos and Dr. Stillwell, we have myself and the program leaders, and then we have the program support team. So there's several layers to work with you. So yes, we want to make sure that everyone who gets a certificate has completed 7 of the 9 assignments and has, again, satisfactorily completed them. But we are flexible. This is not, you're not competing with your fellow students for an A letter grade or a top honors or anything like that. We recognize that you're all busy people with busy lives, and we want to fit within those lives and still do something useful. Paul asks, is this course sortable toward a marketing or consulting career? I think yes. I think Aris and I can compare answers on that. I mean, for me, I would say that business analytics is becoming a hugely, if not growing, important component of marketing and consulting. I think we're going to get to a point where you can't really do those jobs well without having a business analytics background, especially in those two fields, because it involves defining problems and solving problems, and in some cases looking for results. So, I would say yes with 3 exclamation points. Aris?
Yeah, absolutely. The vast majority of emails actually that we get outside, of this course from companies' contacts is about marketing analytics. That's most of the success stories come from that field. And if there are companies that are not already doing, they're definitely missing out big time on that respect. And I have,
Good.
apologies, Dave, I will have to leave because of a class with another meeting, but it was such a pleasure to see so many of you and have a chance to respond to your questions today. And please get in touch, of course, offline. If you have any additional questions, you're more than welcome to reach out and drop us an email or through the platform. We'll be more than happy to respond to those.
Thank you, Aris. And I want to apologize. We generally do not, we are very adherent to our webinar time. Introductory webinars are generally the one exception to the rule because there are so many questions to be answered. But again, we do want to be respectful of your time as well as our schedule. So I'll let Aris jump off and I'll finish up here. So I want to thank Aris. Thank you. I will see you in the beginning of the course in a couple of weeks, just as we hope to see most of these participants. So we're looking forward to that.
Looking forward to that. See you, Dave.
Great. So we'll continue just through some of your questions. And again, you'll really, for those who are taking the course, you'll get a kick out of Aris. And David Stillwell is as I said, they're very different personalities, very different approaches, but they work very well together and they respect the heck out of each other, which is always nice. Takashi asks, do I need to join in the live session? No, anything we do that is live, it's always recommended, and we try to make it as time zone friendly as possible so that, you know, again, this time is generally within waking hours for most of the world's population. At the same time, everything we do is recorded. We have students that, for one reason or another, have never been able to join a live session, and they do just fine. Again, they were able to watch the webinar recordings, watch the office hour recordings, and obviously the on-demand videos are recording only. I also wanted to emphasize in response to one of the questions we had earlier, as far as Q&A and any kind of questions that you have for us, though we will answer questions over email 24 hours a day, usually within, you know, we generally require a 24-hour response time. But they're on the course platform. Once you enroll in the course and you get directed toward a course platform, you will see that you get, there's a support tab, and it becomes your best friend, because through that support tab, you can get access to the program support team, to myself. And so each week we get no fewer than a dozen questions from students, and some of them are just basic clarifications. Others are administrative in nature. Others are assignment extensions. So you can always, you know, you can always ask a question on your time. And sometimes people also have questions they're not comfortable asking in front of the group in a situation like this, and that's perfectly fine. We will address those privately. So we are going to have to stop. And again, I know there are always more questions than answers. What I would say is, for any remaining questions, feel free. I'll do a little bit of a lightning round right now, but then feel free to communicate with your program advisors, with the folks that have been talking to you. We do want to make sure that you are, you know, that you're as comfortable as you can be, that you're in the right place before you make the decision to enroll. So again, I'm going to do a quick lightning round now. And then, as I said, I've already had to push back another commitment as well. So I want to make sure that we're able to end on time, or at least, you know, within 20 minutes of being on time. So again, I think career transition for Tomas, I think career transition we covered. I think that's it. This is this is almost at its most useful during a career transition. Decision-making for internal process optimization. Yeah, when we talk about risk mitigation or operating more cost effectively, really the two things, if you want to be very simplistic about it, the two, you know, end use applications in business analytics have to do with either you know, offensive strategies like business growth, market share capturing, et cetera, or defensive strategy, which is risk, you know, cost mitigation, risk mitigation. And I think so internal process optimization, in other words, doing the process, engaging the process from point A to point B in the most effective, efficient, fastest, cheapest way possible, minimizing the volatility, minimizing the constraints. It's a classic engineering or optimization problem. And we do cover much of that within the business analytics world. You know, business analytics is often an accompaniment to more traditional methods toward achieving goals that have been around for quite some time. So Sam asks, I would like to apply this knowledge to prepare predictive models to gain competitive advantage. Will you cover kind of examples and databases that we would need for that purpose? Yes, in general. Will we cover the specific elements that you need? You may have follow-up questions. We might have to discuss specific industries, but in general, understanding the basis for predictive analytics for, as we talked about just before, offensive purposes like gaining competitive advantage or market share is certainly a big element of this course. Yunmi asks, would be able to learn how decision-making process can be documented and shared to the business? Absolutely. And as Dr. Oraiopoulos mentioned, that last module of talking about organizational constraints, organizational legal ethical constraints, but the organizational part is exactly what you're talking about here. Kunal asks, are there examples of applicability to work in government public policy issues? Yes, we don't have the capstone project per se is not, we don't really do that in the course because we sort of touch upon each module in a more time limited fashion because people don't always have time for a single capstone project. But the first part of your question is very relevant. We talk about businesses not just as business organizations, but organizations in general. And we have many participants coming from government, regulatory bodies, policy making groups, NGOs, think tanks. So it's, organizational decisions, sometimes we equate the words organization and business, but we recognize that that's not always the case. So cases, again, you'll have plenty of cases to discuss in the course. Cleophas asks, is it important for business analysts to master data analysis tools? Many professors will tell you that because of most tools are evolving to the point where they are meant for wider and wider audiences. So yes, it's always good to know something than not to know something. But just like, for example, you used to have to know HTML programming to design a website. Now you go on Squarespace or or Wix or any of these companies and they do it for you. And that's increasingly happened with analytics tools as well. The visualization tools, the user accessibility, the usability are becoming much easier. So it's less about the tools themselves and more about the applications of the tools and the concepts behind the tools. Okay, I think, and there's also a question about received past feedback. I think if you look on the website of the course, I'm going to tell our program support to look at Mark's question. I think it's a good one. We've had some great testimonials in the past, so if there are ways to get that to Mark, I'm sure you can look around. I think this course, from what we certainly conduct analysis all the time, and it seems to be quite highly rated. I don't have that information in front of me now, but I will ask our program support team to reach out to you, and really, if there's any, you should ask your program advisors about that. As I said, I know there's no shortage of good testimonials and feedback. I apologize because the question list keeps growing, but we are really out of time, and I want to make sure I can get to as much as possible here. Sanjay says, would be thought to would we be able to bring hands-on skills as a roadmap for the same to pursue further learning in the area? I mean, generally, yes, that's kind of what we're looking for in the course. Yunmi says, during this course, we'd be able to get some good ideas regarding who to hire to get the jobs done. We do talk about job descriptions. We do talk about the general roles in the organization. Again, those might be questions that are better posed during the course in the context of the particular module that's discussed. Julia says, I wonder in this course how to make better decisions by data. What is the difference between general course of data learning or Python or BA? Those including how to look at data and find the problem. These are all concepts that we cover in this course. We don't cover the specifics of Python as much because there are many tools available. And again, it's not about the tools so much as it's about the concepts overall. But what you described is basically what we do in the course. Leo says, would this course be appropriate for a business student looking to further his schools before starting to work? Yeah, as I said, we have about 15 to 20% of the people have fewer than 5 years of work experience, and that probably covers this sort of grad school range where if you're a business school student and this is a way to complement or add on to the more traditional coursework, it's often very appropriate. As I said, I bet in 5 years, business analytics is going to be a requirement for every business school. We're just not quite there yet, and that's why these certificate courses are so popular. During and after this course, we'll be able to counsel from Cambridge while taking this role to our organizations. That's not a formal element of the course. I will say the professors have been remarkably accessible. They all have email addresses that are publicly available on the Cambridge website. I know students have come back to them for questions or linked up with them on LinkedIn. I've gotten questions myself following the course. So you do get access to the course materials for 11 months out of after the, or I think it's 10 months after the course is done. So a total of 12 months from the start of the course. So you get access to all the course materials, the course platform, the discussion boards, you know, the profiles, everything. So that's often helpful. And then, yeah, people do get in touch on their own, or they get in touch with each other through LinkedIn or other networking tools. But formal advice from Cambridge University, again, this is a certificate program, not a degree program. So there are some limitations to that. But again, I would, you know, the best way to know is to ask. Okay, Nikira, I just answered your question inadvertently, but you do get access to the support functions of the role for several months, for 10 months after the course ends. Although, frankly, most of the interaction is confined to the 2 months that the course does happen. The anonymous attendee says, I'm a master's student, worked for 1 year in management, now do a master in management. I mean, again, I think this fits your broad criteria. I think this, you know, theoretically, this is a perfect course for you in terms of where you are. But again, it has to be the right fit for you. But, you know, it certainly seems logical. And I think, Julie, I think this question is I think I just forgot to click the answer. Once the course ended, you get your certification between, I think it's usually about 2 weeks after the course is ended. You can always ask the program support team, but that's usually they want to give a chance. What happens is they like to issue the certificates all in one single batch, and you get about somewhere between a week and 2 weeks of flexibility after the last due date to make sure you're fully up to date on assignments. Again, nobody, you know, the course will not fail you if you have one assignment that is not due. What we will do is bother you until you submit that assignment, or work with you on a more flexible arrangement for the assignment. And sometimes that process at the end of the course takes a week or two before, you know, everybody's fully engaged. You know, 95% of the people complete it on time, and then you always have a few stragglers. And that's just, you know, the nice thing about having an infrastructure is that we can, you know, we can work with you to make sure that we all do our best to see that you you complete the course. All right, I have to stop here. But again, I want to thank you all for the time that you've given us. I will thank Aris for the time, of course, that he's given. We appreciate you being with us today. I hope to see most, if not all of you, when we do begin the course in a couple of weeks. This is fun for us, as you can tell. There's a reason we can talk about this for 90 minutes nonstop. It's an exciting topic. It's a growing topic in the business. Often there are more questions than answers. Even the words business analytics, you could ask 10 people for a description. They would tell you 10 different definitions. And we do our best to essentially address that in the most sort of comprehensive but user-friendly way possible. So with that, I want to thank our program support team for making all of this work so well behind the scenes. You will continue to see their excellent work as you join us in the course. And I'd also want to thank you for taking your time. And as I said, hour-long webinars, with the exception of our introductory webinars, are hour-long webinars. So you don't have to worry about blocking that extra 24 minutes that we took today. But I did want to make sure we got to most, if not all, of the questions. So again, I want to thank you all. Please stay safe and healthy. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. And again, if you haven't enrolled yet, feel free to reach out to your program advisor with any remaining questions. We hope to see you in the course. And again, as putting on our faculty hats, we will see hopefully all of you in a few weeks' time once we begin. So thanks again for your time, everyone, and have a great week.